Okay, let's begin. Tonight's class, the subject of tonight's class is accessing your transcendent powers, accessing transcendent powers altogether, not just yours, but in general. We have to understand what this means. Just a heads up to everybody, anyone who's new here, these classes are recorded and they're on YouTube. You'll find them on YouTube. Just look for this channel, Kabbalah Decoded channel. And in addition to that, you can get the videos, change them every week, but there's a video always, the latest video is always up on my website as well, KabbalahDecoded.com, KabbalahDecoded.com. And you can use the contact information there if you have any questions to send me a question, or you can just send by email, that's fine too. In any event, let's begin. Let's begin with this idea of accessing the powers of the transcendent powers of the soul and exactly what that means. Okay, so it begins as follows. There's a whole concept right at the beginning of the Bible, beginning in the book of Genesis, where God says, "Nasa Adam b'tzalmenu kidmutenu." Let us make man in our image, in our likeness. Now, there's many explanations of what that means and how do we interpret it exactly. We've got to pick the whole thing apart, but that's not the focus so much of tonight's class, so I don't want to get into it at too much length. But the basic idea is when it says Na'aseh Adam, we will make man. Which man is that referring to? So the Kabbalistic sources explain that it's really referring to two types of men, so to speak. When we say man, we don't mean in a gender sense. We just mean man as humankind, or man as we'll see shortly. So the first man, in other words, the macrocosmic man, again, man in quotes, is the world which is called Adam Kadmon. Adam Kadmon. Adam Kadmon is the highest of the worlds. There are five, the Kabbalah speaks about 5 different worlds. The highest of the worlds is the world of Adam Kadmon. It's sort of a meta world that contains all of the other worlds. So there's Adam Kadmon, and then there is the world of Atzilut below that, and then there's the world of Beria, Yetzira, and Asiya. Right, so those are the worlds. Adam Kadmon, Atzilut, Beria, Yetzira, and Asiya. Those are the worlds. Now, when we say a world, what do we mean by a world? Well, a world is a plane of existence. And the world is defined by the degree to which it conceals or reveals the divine presence. By the degree to which it conceals or reveals the divine presence, or if you want to put it in different terminology, the infinite light, the Or Ein Sof. Before creation could come about, even the creation of the world of Adam Kadmon, this meta world, the highest of all worlds, before that could come about, there had to be what is called the Tzimtzum, the doctrine of the Tzimtzum, a very famous doctrine in the writings of the Arizal. It was not known about prior to the Arizal. He was the one that sort of introduced it and explained it, etc. And there's a whole literature on explaining how the Tzimtzum works and so on. But nevertheless, it was kind of you could say, a concealment of God concealing himself, or rather not himself, but God concealing his infinite light or the infinite revelation of himself in order to create or give place to a finite world. Because a finite world could not exist within infinite revelation. There first had to be the removal, so to speak, of the infinite revelation, which is called the Siluk HaOr, the removing of the light, or as explained in Hasidic works, the concealment of the light. It wasn't removed anywhere. There was nowhere, so to speak, to remove it to. It is the essence of existence, but it was simply concealed. Now, after this concealment, the various worlds begin. The word for world in Hebrew is the word olam. I'll write it here in the chat box so you can see it. I'll just write it in English, olam. I can write in Hebrew too if you want, olam, and it's from the word he'elem, or in English, Helem means concealment. Right, helem, concealment. God conceals himself in the process of creation, so to speak. But again, it's only concealment. It's not removal. So, the first Adam, so to speak, that was created, the first man, Adam Kadmon, the first Adam that was created was this world of Adam Kadmon, and all of the other worlds developed from the world of Adam Kadmon. But there were two aspects to Adam Kadmon. One aspect of Adam Kadmon was the world, what is called the world of Tohu, the world of chaos, or you might want to call it, if you're a scientist, you might want to call it the world of entropy, where things are just always falling apart and never sort of getting together and never organizing themselves into an organized structure. And then there's the world of Tikkun, which is the rectification of the world of Tohu, is a rectification of entropy of the world of chaos, on which order is imposed. Now that order is the order of the planes of reality, the 5 planes of reality, again, Adam Kadmon, etc., the 5 planes of reality, and Tohu and Tikkun. Tohu is really part of Adam Kadmon, and then all of the rest of the worlds that come below, Atzilut, Bria, Yitzir, Asiya, are the worlds of Tikkun. Those are the worlds of Tikkun, of rectification, of imposing an order on things. And you will note, many of you are aware of this, that the Torah, the teachings of the Torah, seek to always impose an order on disordered things. The very important principle in the Torah in general is the principle of order. Now, we're going to go into it a little bit later in more detail, but this idea that there should be order is not necessarily a contradiction to the idea of free choice. In fact, it's not a contradiction to the concept of free choice. A person still has free choice, but nevertheless, in order to achieve anything, there has to be a certain order. However, the problem with order is that it's restricting. It is restricting. There's free choice, but nevertheless, there's certain restrictions. Those restrictions are at one end of the spectrum are overly restrictive in the sense that a person lives in the world lives in too finite of a world. I'll get to this a little bit later and explain it in a little bit more detail shortly. So, the purpose of tonight's class is to be able to explain how one can live in the finite world, in the world of order, and yet access those things that are not disorder, which is the world of Tohu, the world of chaos, the world of entropy, but rather that one can access those powers that transcend order. They're not disorder. They transcend the normal order of things. Now, the normal order of things is usually explained in Kabbalah as the product, let's call it the product of the name Elohim. The name Elohim, or the way you pronounce it in Hebrew, is Elohim. But we don't pronounce it as it's written because unless you're using it in prayer or in Torah study, we try not to use the names. It's kind of the idea of using a name in vain. So the divine names, there's various divine names found throughout the Torah. 10 of them primarily are the ones that we discussed that are found in written scripture. These 10 names, there's 7 of them, but then by various combinations, it makes 10 altogether, corresponding to the 10 sfirot, which we'll get to shortly. Of these 10 names, all of them are indicative of the idea of a certain type. Each name represents a certain type of activity. The phrase is Lefi ma'asai ani ekra, according to my deeds I am called. Therefore, for example, if the deed the act is an act of kindness, then the name Kel, Aleph Lamed, or El as you would pronounce it, is the name that is manifested in that type of action. So the name Kel shows on the idea of chesed, of kindness. The name Elokim shows the opposite, the idea of restriction and the idea of limitation, restriction, limitation. Now, the word Elokim in Kabbalah, as you all know, Kabbalah is very fond often of gematria, the values of the letters. So the name Elokim, Aleph is 1, Lamed is 30, Hey 5, Yud 10, Mem 40, altogether adds up to 86. So the name Elohim adds up to 86, which is the same gematria, the same numerical value of the word Hateva, nature. So nature is a restrictive, orderly manifestation of godliness. That's what it is. It's a manifestation of godliness in an orderly fashion, and it represents, or it's the manifestation of the name Elokim. Okay, but then you have another name, the name which is pronounced as, I'm not going to say it, but it's pronounced as Havaya, Yud Hey Vav Hey. Now, the grammarians and Kabbalists as well both say that the name Yud Kei Vav Kei, that's the name which is it's called in English the ineffable name of God, is the name that represents these transcendent qualities, the transcendent ideas, right? The transcendent qualities. In other words, that which is beyond time and space. Whereas Elohim is the creation of space, the creation of nature, the creation of space. The name Yud Kei Vav Kei, Havaya, represents that which transcends time and space. Therefore, the word is comprised of 3 Hebrew words: Haya, Hoveh, V'yihyeh. Past, present, and future all at once. Right? Past, present, and future all at once. So that's the transcendent aspect of things. Now, when God creates, after the Tzimtzum, he creates this Adam Kadmon. So that is the higher Adam. But then there's the lower Adam as well. The lower Adam generally is referred to in Kabbalah as the Sfirot of the world of Atzilut. But not all of the Sfirot, the 6 Sfirot of the world of what is called the Partzuf of Zeir Anpin. Now, I'm not going to go into this; is too technical. It's getting a bit too technical already. I'm not going to get into all the technical terminology, but suffice it to say that the idea of Zeir Anpin is reflected in a human being. Now, let's just get something up, a chart up on the screen so that you can see. Let me make it a bit smaller so you can see it better. Okay. I have to share a screen. That might help. Okay, there you go. So here's many of you have this already. I've sent it to you. If anyone wants it, just drop me an email or whatever, or send me a message via the website, KabbalahDecoder.com, and I will send you a copy. It's in a PDF. So, okay. Now, just ignore all these boxes over here. Just concentrate on the round entities over here. This represents the structure of the Sfirot. Right, the Sfirot come in a certain structure. There's 10 of them, as you can see. The picture is not big enough. The screen is not big enough. There you go. Now you can see it. I hope everyone can see it still. Okay, so this is the 10 Sfirot in the structure that they are found. And over here, you'll see the correspondences, which I'm going to get to shortly, the correspondences in the human soul. We've discussed these many times before in other classes. But When we talk about Ze'er Anpin, in other words, the microcosm as it is in the world of Atzilut, we are talking about this aspect over here. It doesn't do this because here we are. Right, that would be called Ze'er Anpin. This section over here, just imagine that this goes a little bit higher, actually. All right, let's start it here. So there we go. Okay, that would be Ze'er Anpin. Those 6 Sfirot. Chesed, Gvurah, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod. Okay. Now, what do these represent? What do all of these things represent in terms of the human soul, in terms of a human being? So as you can see over here, maybe you can't see, maybe it's too small already, but you could probably see over here that each of these boxes gives an explanation of what these things are in the soul. Now, let me just explain another concept before we get into an analysis of what it is that I'm talking about, the transcendent aspects rather than the immanent, immanent ones. Okay, so there's 2 types of light that are explained in Kabbalah. One is called Sovev Kol Almin. Wait a second, I think I actually have it here. 1 second. We'll get back to the chart in a second. Right, accessing your transcendent powers. So the first thing is called Mamale Kol Almin, or the Or Pnimi, the light within the vessels. In the process of creation, in order to bring the light down, the whole purpose of creation was to create a finite world with the energy within it. That's called lights within vessels, or orot betoch kelim in Hebrew. Lights within the vessels. And that is called Mamale Kol Almin. It's the godliness that fills and energizes the world from inside, so to speak. It's the internal light within. Light, when we say light, we don't mean light literally, but energy, or however you want to put it. As opposed to the transcendent or the enveloping light, which is called Sovev Kol Almin. It surrounds the world. It's also called Or Makif. Makif means to surround, to envelop, the enveloping light. So you have 2 types of light. There's the light within, and there's the light which is enveloping. Or if you want to put it in this terminology, things that you can get your hands on, right? Which is Mamale Kol Almin. You can that's tangible, that's measurable, that's finite. And Sovev Kol Almin is not something you can get your hands on. Why? Because it transcends you, it's beyond you. It's not something that you can, so to speak, put in a box and take home, right? Sovev Kol Almin, on the contrary, you're within it. It envelops you, it enwraps you everywhere equally. Okay, so now, in the process of creation, these 2 forms of light were used. And also in the creation of man. So that you have the immanent powers of the soul, and you have the transcendent powers of the soul. All of these powers of the soul here, all of these are, no, not that one, no. All of these here, wait a second, let me see if I can get this here. All of these here are immanent powers. These, the ones that I mentioned before, are the emotional powers. These here are intellectual powers. We'll look at them in a minute. And this is the Malchut, is the Sphira, or the group of powers that brings things into reality, into existence, into the finite world. So let's just go from the top and explain them a little bit better. We're going to explain first Chokhmah, and then we'll get to Keter afterwards. Okay, so what's Chokhmah? Chokhmah in the soul is the initiator. It's the concept of wisdom, intelligence, insight. It's also the idea of self-nullification, right? Self-nullification, in other words, in order to achieve wisdom, one has to be nullified, one's ego has to be nullified. A wise person is never an arrogant person. Wisdom and arrogance are contraries. Wisdom is what is called, the word, if anyone can read Hebrew over here, chokhmah, which spells the word koach ma, the ability or the power to be undefined. That's what chokhmah is all about. It's the power of being undefined. That's what wisdom is. Wisdom is not something that you learn from another source. In other words, from a written source or from something that you've been taught. Wisdom is the ability to see beyond what it is that you've been taught to the very core of whatever it is that you're examining. And in order to be able to do that, one has to, so to speak, leave oneself behind. Nullification. In Hebrew, that's called bitul. Okay, bina, understanding. Analytical thinking. Da'at, consciousness. Knowledge, awareness, focus, interconnection. All of those explain da'at. And then we get to the emotional qualities, love, fear or awe. And here there's negative traits as well that correspond to these. On top is the positive, and underneath, where you see the negative sign in front of them, are the negative ones. So the negative aspect of chesed would be something like self-love or lust, right? Lust. It's loving something which is inappropriate for one's status in life. Lust. Self-love is for sure not an appropriate way of doing things. Okay, gvura can be the idea of awe, of fear, of the need for privacy, and so on. Setting boundaries, restraint. The negative side of it is anger, jealousy, hatred, and so on. Similarly, you have tiferet. Tiferet is the idea of compassion on the positive side, right? On the negative side can lead to pride, boastfulness, arrogance, etc. And you have netzach hod yesod. You'll be anyone who has this chart can go through it by themselves. We don't need to dwell on it. What I want to do now is get to the non-immanent. Now, all of these are immanent. In other words, they're in our control. We have the ability, yes, it takes practice and it takes knowledge and it takes time and it takes meditation and it takes a lot of work on oneself to achieve all of these in their states of perfection. It takes a lot of time. But there's a quicker path to achieving all of them, and that is to jump right away to the idea of Keter. Yeah, of Keter. Let's see if we can underline this properly here. It's not letting me do it. PDFs are not my thing so much. Huh? Keter. Okay, so there you go, Keter. Now, Keter represents the transcendent powers of the soul. If anyone's asking a question here, Zion Pin small face, exactly right. So Keter represents the transcendent powers of the soul. In the worlds, that world of Alam Kadmon is the Keter of the worlds. Atzilut is the Chokhmah of the world. Bria is the Bina of the worlds. Yetzira is the six sfirot of the emotional powers of the world, and Asiya is Malchut. Corresponds to Malchut. Okay, so to go back to this concept of Keter, what does Keter represent in the soul? Again, these transcendent powers. It's not something that you have in your control. It's something that has you in their control, so to speak. What are these things? These things are the power of faith, delight, and will. There's three aspects. There's three different levels in Keter. The highest one is called faith, and the middle one, delight, and finally, will. Now, in terms of being able to control anything, will is the most likely thing that we can control, right? Will. Now, how do we control these, and how do we come to the higher transcendent powers? The power of the soul called delight, and even the highest one called faith, which correspond, by the way, in Kabbalah, as you can see here, to Arich, Atik, and Radla. Radla is the very highest one. Reshit Deloit Yada, the beginning which is not known, then Atik Yomin, and then Arich Anpin. Okay, so how do we access those powers? There are various ways, but one of those ways, one of the ways is called the derech of tshuva, right? Tshuva means returning. Usually, most places you'll see tshuva is explained as repentance, but really that is not the incorrect translation. Tshuva means to return, and what does that mean? It means returning the soul to the one who gave it. Giving the soul back to the one who gave it to you. But giving it back doesn't mean giving up your life. It means dedicating your life to the purpose for which you were created. Everybody has a purpose. That's the keter. The keter of a person's being is his purpose. As you can see here, what is my purpose? That's what a person has to ask himself, herself. What is my purpose? What is it that I'm supposed to be doing in the world? It's more than just the concept of meaning. Of course, that is what gives meaning, but meaning is, in a sense, I don't want to say it's, I don't want to give the wrong impression, but meaning is, in a sense, a selfish, well, selfish is not the right word, a self-involved concept. What gives me meaning? What gives my life meaning? It's a little bit different when you say, what is my purpose? Because my purpose is what I was created for. It's not what I get out of it. Meaning is what I get out of it. Purpose is what you put into it. So a person has to find their purpose. That is the keter of their existence. That is where the transcendent powers reside. When one finds one's purpose and one goes after it with a vengeance, so to speak, when you relentlessly follow that pattern, that your purpose, the reason that you were created, is set up in this world, that you were set into this world, when you can follow that purpose to its fullest, that is essentially using your transcendent powers. Why? Because your purpose doesn't come from you. Your purpose is given to you. It's something that transcends you completely. But that you have the ability to live up to or not live up to. I'm just going to answer a couple of questions here. There's a few questions that came in and I didn't yet address them. Let's see here. How does Chokhmah, actually any three, of course, transcendence, can you connect transcend beyond the meaning of definitions of them? Yeah, I think we perhaps addressed that. Tell me if I didn't address it. I think that's what I was trying to address now. Not understand at all understand how they could be disorganized without organized. How can there be an entire world of chaos without an organized principle describing and defining, which means the world would have been both? There cannot be entropy without enthalpy. Please explain. Well, what would a black hole be? The height of entropy, I would imagine, right? In other words, it's completely chaotic. Doesn't seem to be any purpose. It's not working together as a unit. Let's put it that way. Let's not go into cosmology and physics and so on and so forth. It's not my field of expertise. I just wanted to bring that as an analogy. I can point you to somebody who is actually a friend of mine. Is actually a physicist, and he's involved in these kinds of things. And in fact, we just had a discussion last night about it. If anyone, and he's a religious Jew, a Hasidic Jew, actually, the professor in university. Okay, so when you say a pure world, the world of chaos is not pure, right? The world of chaos is very impure. But it's chaotic in the sense that nothing works together. There's no harmony of things in the world of chaos. everything's working against everything else. If you want to see how this works, maybe spend a day looking at your government on operation, the House of Representatives or something like that, or even the Senate. You'll see chaos. Everyone's fighting against everyone. That's unfortunately that's the way it is. So okay, but the idea of accessing these transcendent powers is finding one's purpose and using all the powers of one's soul, all the other powers, all the immanent powers, to manifest that purpose. That is accessing the transcendent powers of one's soul. You probably, many of you, or probably all of you even, may have heard of Viktor Frankl. Dr. Viktor Frankl was a Holocaust survivor, and he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. Very good book. It's very, very, very well worth reading. Very well worth reading. And so he speaks about this whole idea of that man is driven by meaning, and people who don't have meaning in their lives are in some kind of in a sense, in some kind of internal chaos, because they don't have meaning. So meaning drives everything, but the way we explain it here is not that it's meaning per se, but more that it is purpose, right? That drives the whole picture. Now, order out of chaos, yes. That's what we're doing here. We're learning the concept of order and chaos and making order out of chaos, but even order has to be transcended to that which is beyond order. And that which be, in other words, order has to follow a purpose. Order itself is not, it's a good thing for sure. Order is a good thing, but it has its restrictions. That restriction, those restrictions of order are living one's life, so to speak, in a sort of a humdrum kind of a way, you know, every day the same thing. And no, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not a bad thing, but it's certainly not self-transcending. But finding one's purpose and diving into it is essentially transcending oneself, because that purpose doesn't come from you again. It comes from God. That is something that you are here for. It's not here for you. Meaning is here for you. You are here for purpose, for the purpose for which you were created, the purpose for which you're living in this world. And not everyone achieves this is for sure. Now, why did I want to talk about this concept? Let me just give you an idea. There was a Hasidic Rebbe. Rebbe means a grand master, I suppose you would say, a master, a Hasidic master, whose name was Rabbi Shmuel, or the Rebbe Maharash, as he's called. And a very interesting character, but he said that his motto in life, basically, was that most people, when they confront an issue of one sort or another, they'll try and go under. In other words, they'll duck until things change, until the threat passes, and then they'll go about the business as usual. Other people will just try and skirt the whole issue. They'll go around it. They'll go around the barrier, right? They'll try and skirt it somehow or another. And he says, my approach is l'chatchila riber. From the beginning, I'm going over the top, right? In other words, the barrier, as far as I'm concerned, is it doesn't exist. I'm going over the top. I'm using my transcendent powers to do what I have to do. Now, this is there's a story which is told in the Midrash. Midrash is rabbinic literature which associates various stories with verses in the Torah, verses in the scripture. So there's a story about Abraham that when he was on his way to I think it was when he was on his way to Mount Moriah. When he was on his way to Mount Moriah, he was stopped he came to a barrier, a natural barrier, a river, and he couldn't get across. It was a broad and fast running body of water, and he couldn't get across. So what's the normal way of doing things? The normal way of doing it is you go right, you go left until you can find a crossing somehow or another, or until it dries up, or until you find land whatever, something like that. And that's how you cross. Abraham knew that he had a purpose, he had a mission to accomplish, to get to Mount Moriah, and he wasn't going to take no for an answer. So instead of skirting the issue, going around and finding a way over or whatever, he just went straight into the water, started wading into the water, and he waded up to his neck, up to his nose, and then the water split and he walked through. Right? Similar to the splitting of the sea in the time of the Israelites in the desert. So the Midrash says that this was, the river was really a mirage, right? It wasn't real. Very often we have barriers that are real, but there's different ways of dealing with them. Some people try and avoid them altogether, which is not a bad thing, to avoid problems. But when a problem is unavoidable, the way to do it is not to duck until it passes over and it's gone. The way to do it is to attack it directly, from the beginning over the top. And how do you do that? Just like Abraham did it. He knew he had to get somewhere. He knew he had to be in a certain place, and he wasn't going to take no for an answer, because this is where God told him to go, and he was going to go. Nothing was going to be able to stop him. Okay. Yeah, Keter, sorry, Annie. Is a Keter that transcends each Sphira? Yeah, Keter transcends all of the Sphira. Is it something you can do? Yes. You use your will to cut through all of the red tape, so to speak. Let me just finish reading the question and I'll explain it. How can you find your purpose? Keter is active, is to activate us. So we're drawn into Keter, yes. Yes, Keter is the, it's a nice way of putting it. It's the activating idea of the activating purpose of your life. How do you find out what your life purpose is? Well, there's several ways of doing it. The most common way of doing it is to sit down and figure out what particular talents, powers, abilities, interests, and so on with which you have been endowed. And based on that, you'll know what your purpose is. You can figure it out from there. A second way of doing it is to go to someone who's expert in these things, and they can help you figure it out. And there's probably other ways as well. Some people know from the beginning what their purpose is. Like, for instance, I was speaking to a fellow who told me that he's, from when he was very little already, he knew that his thing in the world was he's here in this world to make music. Musician, very talented musician, but anyway, that was his. So that's what I'm here for. Anyway, okay, let's go to the next. Does habit reduce chaos? Habit has a negative connotation to a certain extent. Habits means sort of doing things by rote. Let's call it, instead of habit, let's call it a defined order. One's day should have a defined order. If you have a look into Jewish texts and Jewish lifestyle, is defined from the moment you wake up till the moment you go to sleep. There's a certain, there's a lot of leeway, obviously, but there's a certain pattern which your life should follow, right? From when you get up in the morning until you go to sleep at night. For example, 3 prayers through the day. There's the prayer on awaking, the prayer on going to sleep. There's certain focus of the mind on various texts and things like that throughout the day. So there's a lot of things that bring order into chaos. Now, does that mean that is necessarily habit? It can become habit, but that's a negative thing because habit is usually rote. So, I don't know. I hope that answers the question. Okay, not so much. Not so much a connection, Alan. Okay. Transcendent powers, is that faith in? Well, faith is the faith in. We wake up every morning, and the first thing in Jewish lifestyle that we do is we say that what's called the Modeh Ani prayer, right? Modeh Ani lefanecha melech chai v'kayam. I acknowledge you, the God, right? That you returned my soul to me, in kindness, in compassion. And then the last two words are very interesting, Rabba emunatecha, which the real translation of Rabba emunatecha means, great is your faith in me. Not our faith in God, but God's faith in us. Great is, why? Because he returned your soul to you, right? You woke up this morning. You woke up this morning means that he didn't give up on you yet, right? He didn't give up on you. You still have what to do. Rabba emunatecha, great is your faith in me that I will be able to carry out the mission for which my soul came down to this world. Now, there's a mission in a general sense, which is to make the world a better place, to make the world a world of tikkun, to rectify, to improve, etc. But everyone has their piece in that, what that means exactly. Okay, so accessing the transcendent powers means that when one comes to a barrier, you go over the top. The barrier shouldn't stop you from doing what you need to do. You'll find a way around it. You'll find a way over it. You'll find whatever it is, right? Focus on the purpose. Don't focus on the barrier. Focus on your mission. Don't focus on the difficulties, on the problems, on the barriers. We focus on where it is that we're going. There's a story told about the Baal Shem Tov. He was once walking in, as he very often did, he was walking through a forest, and unbeknownst to him, there was a gang of highwaymen robbers that were about to rob him. But he came to a ravine, right? And the Baal Shem Tov was somewhere else completely. He was not in his head. He was not concentrating on where it was that he was walking. He was completely somewhere else, and he just carried on walking. Past the edge. He didn't fall down, right? He just walked over to the other edge of the ravine. He didn't even realize that there was a ravine there. He just carried on walking. He was somewhere else. And when they saw this, this is a guy we're not going to touch, right? We're not going to deal with him, because anyone that could do anything and something like that is someone we better leave alone. All right. Let's leave it at that, and maybe we'll expand on it next week and explain a little bit more, unless you have questions, in which case write me your questions, kabbalahdecoded@gmail.com. Kabbalah decoded one word, Kabbalah with two B's and an H, Kabbalah, decoded at gmail.com. You can write your questions, and I will either answer them in the class or answer you by email. All right, let's leave it at that, and have a great weekend, and see you next time around. Bye now. Welcome.